so I can post this later. So I have one note that I'd like to share with you all before we begin. I have been teaching philosophy at Micah for a very long time, as I indicated the other day. I have routinely been teaching topics that intersect with religion since I teach philosophy. It comes up all the time. As many of you know, since you're Micah students, religion is a very fraught subject at Micah. It's often controversial, and Micah students are very quick and happy to criticize it, which I'm very open to. I mean, I made that clear. I'm teaching a class on this, right? But one of your classmates did remind me that this is a potentially sensitive topic for some people, and just be respectful in your comments and critiques about when you talk about religion. That said, just so in case it helps with anybody's context for this class, I personally am a believer, even though I'm teaching this class, so I am perfectly comfortable with any kind of, I've heard them all, any kind of criticism on religion. So, but I just wanted to lay that context clear, and so urge us all to please be respectful. Okay, there, done. Now, the other thing I guess I should say is you all were very, this class, you all are very eager users of chat. I'm not even going to pretend that I can keep up. I'll do my best, but if I miss anything in the chat that's spicy, you have to tell me, okay? Don't say anything illegal that would get me fired, but if there's anything exciting that I should know about, let me know. Okay, cool. So let's dive in. We're going to talk about William James, the varieties of religious experience. I don't really have much to say about William James as a thinker, philosopher. And part of the reason is because I don't really know him very well. He's not one of my faves, if you will. I like him plenty, but I'm not terribly well versed in him. I'll say a couple things about him, and then maybe we can talk about what you all inferred from the text. He is probably one of the best known American philosophers, definitely one of the earliest that is well known. Maybe some would even consider him a father of American philosophy. Among the great American philosophers of the previous century, you have guys by the name of John Dewey. He's probably the best known. If it used to be that when you were in school, you had to learn something called the Dewey Decimal System about how to find books in the library. Now you just Google that shit, right? But John Dewey came up with the Dewey Decimal System. Dewey is one of my favorites. I love him. He taught at Hopkins for a little bit, actually. He comes after James. James lives, I believe, 1840 to 1910, something in that period of time. William James comes from a very well-known family. For those of you in the know, I believe he's the cousin of Henry James, the author. Turn of the Screw, the Bostonians. I haven't read a word of Henry James. So maybe you know, but my wife likes him plenty. And William James is related to him. William James comes from a family of wealth and comfort, and he's allowed to travel all over the world at a young age, and he becomes multilingual. William James is one of the real innovators in a new field in the 1800s called psychology. Psychology was very new at the time. He actually is a predecessor of Freud. Freud looked up to William James. Freud comes to Boston to meet him. For anybody here familiar with Freud, there are shades of Freudian psychoanalysis in some of what James says. Or if you know some Freud, that can help with your understanding and dialogue with James. In particular, I neglected to indicate this, but in your last chapter for today about the sick soul, he talks about something called melancholia. Sometimes, you know, that's the Latinization of melancholy. Melancholia is actually a Greek word. I believe melon is black, chole blood, black blood. I think it's something like that. But melancholia has a very specific clinical definition in the 1800s, and for Freud as well. Melancholia is clinical depression. Freud, when he talks about melancholia, it's clear. The overlap is clear. James is less so. There are a couple of telltale signs of clinical depression. I am a philosopher. I'm not a psychologist or psychiatrist, but I know enough about the diagnosis of clinical depression. I think, you know, many of us do. This is popularly known, and we could talk, and so we could identify that he's talking about clinical depression by some of the features he attributes to the sick soul. But we'll deal with that when we get there. Yeah. Raven points this out. Edgar Allan Poe would have known melancholy as depression too. Melancholy was a very common term used. It's actually a very old term, has a long history, and its contemporary transformation is, and its contemporary translation is clinical depression. Okay, more or less. Yes. Okay. This is time. Now it's time for me to ignore the chat because I'm getting distracted. What else did I want to say? Oh, well, I guess I'll turn it over to you guys now. First of all, just a general open question. How did you find this reading? Anybody want to? And we can use the hand raising function. And where is that? Anybody know where the hand raising function is? There, somebody figured out because there's already two.
Oh, it's in the reactions.
Reactions.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, Sunny, I see you have your hand up. Go for it.
Oh yeah. I thought the readings themselves were very interesting. Yeah, the introduction makes a point in which they say that William James has a writing style that is a lot more fun than most philosophers. Yeah, most philosophers, yeah, they do tend to write a little, yeah, they're a little bit drawly sometimes. But yeah, William James, he like sprinkles in these anecdotes that are like appealing to the normal reader. But yeah, the reading themselves were kind of hard for me. I had to like go over a few sentences.
Perfectly understandable. Finn?
Hello. Yes, I was gonna say just talking about how I processed it. I have like basically the reading comprehension of like a 6-year-old. I never really made it past the Treehouse Gang books. So reading this is a little bit like dying, but some of it I actually comprehended, which was really awesome. I did have to look up summaries, but also the summaries confused me. But I'm gonna get there for you, Furman Barbander. You do it.
Yeah, you know what I forgot to say at the outset? I forgot to issue an apology. And my apology is I didn't realize how long this reading was for you all. I don't usually assign very long readings, and I guess I got carried away. I looked at your syllabus. I swear to God, this is one of the longest ones of all. I almost scared you all saying one of the shortest. This is one of the longest ones. That said, James, I don't know if I said this last week, but there may be a little bit of a heavy lift for you in the beginning because philosophy is a totally different type of writing style, and you will have to get used to it. That said, William James is not the typical philosopher. As Sunny pointed out, he writes with anecdotes, so he is So this is early style psychology as well, right? He's reading from his case notes, so hopefully that made it a little more manageable. Let me see here. Rebecca, you have your hand up.
Yeah, just coming back to the anecdotes, it felt like a very like human-centered reading. Like the way that he talked about religious experiences when he was like citing the different kind of spiritual experiences people were having,
Mhm.
and the way that he would talk about things like, I guess, clinical depression, which I actually didn't register that that's what he was talking about, but it just felt like he really understood why people would be drawn to religion or would be drawn to like the mind cure stuff he was talking about. I was very interested in that.
Mhm.
It just felt like he was coming to everything from a place of like having either been through it or just having seen so many people experience those things. Like it didn't feel super clinical or super removed from humanity, which I was appreciative of.
Good. Thank you. Natan?
Yeah, the reading was super interesting, kind of dense. So I don't remember everything, but I do remember the part where he talked about like that feeling of dread of like that unworthy being next to that guy's room, and like that sixth sense. I was like, that was really interesting because like I definitely heard stories of like people like feeling watched, and like I was like very curious because she didn't really talk about dreams, because my mom actually had very like powerful dreams, you could say, and
Mhm.
she's like super religious. So I was like, that's like some I just thought it was really interesting, like feeling dread, because I definitely felt being watched, but not like this dread, scary feeling. It's
Mm.
hard to explain.
Thank you.
That part of the reading I also found very interesting, and then where he goes from there into talking about hallucinations, and then from there into how hallucinations differ from religious experiences. I found that really interesting, like the distinction between something that's kind of random almost, and then the difference is like the rationalist thought that like you could rationalize what you would call a religious experience through the context of religion, but a hallucination you can't really. I kind of found that interesting, where and that because I also, similarly to other people, didn't really realize that it was a psychologist talking in the sense of the word. But like when you got to that point, there was this kind of interesting bridge between like religious philosophy and psychology that got like crossed, and I really found that engaging.
Cool. Hold that thought. Chris, you had your hand up. You're going low tech. You got to figure out how to use that thing down there under reactions, but you have the floor.
Okay. Yeah, I think Sunny was being generous when she said sprinkled of anecdotes, because like there were a lot of them. Like there's like that one section, like while he's discussing hallucinations, where it's like 20 pages of it. So yeah, and then like I think overall like it wasn't, especially like for writing from that time period, or it wasn't like that hard to comprehend compared to like the other writings from 1902. And yeah, and I did get that feeling like like with how he's written, where it does kind of feel like, I guess like my best comparison to what I've like read is like the workbooks that my psychologists give me. So yeah, but it wasn't that bad, but it was pretty long, and I do think that like I absorbed maybe like a fraction of it. So yeah.
All right, we'll work on that for today. Irish.
For me, like while I was reading it, I kind of forgot that it was written like around the 1800s because of the words that he used. Maybe there were times where I had to like find the definition of some words, but it was pretty like, I think the anecdotes made it easier to digest, because that's most of the times that I remember most of the anecdotes instead of him explaining what the anecdotes are for. But it was, yeah, I liked him I like him so far.
Great. Raven.
About 1 year ago, there are some people talked just like William James about the morbid mind. They just said, yes, it's on the internet. When it comes to some social issues, they said people should be responsible for their own kind or good. They can just reject or neglect all the evil existence and then they can be good. It just, I feel quite weird at that time because we were talking about social problems. I, I said people need to be educated and they need social welfare and other cares. And they just said you can be good as long as you want to. Okay, I think I can respect their opinions. But now after read the William James book, so maybe I can understand what they are thinking about human beings and about the good essence. Still, I'm not agree with their opinions, but I can understand them now.
Thank you very much. Aiden, what's up?
Hi, I just wanted to, I guess, agree with what Zach said because I was kind of gonna say similar things about how he talked about hallucination versus, I guess, like an imagined religious experience or like a supposed religious experience. And I just found it like I guess that was like a point where I started to really like enjoy his writing because it felt like acknowledging back then even that there could be like a psychological like reasoning behind all these people experiencing these like religious like awakenings or like having these stories of experiencing like religious happenings, I guess, or like miracles at a time where I guess I didn't really think that was something people considered. It was just interesting to hear from in that language, I guess.
Good. Thank you. A couple points of context here. These were written as lectures, as you can imagine. At least the edition I've ordered for you all, it indicates the chapters by lecture. These were written. If hopefully your edition has in the introduction indicated what he wrote these for. He wrote these as lectures, a series called the Gifford Lectures, which are delivered in Edinburgh. And I forget which university that is. I guess at University of Edinburgh. I'm not really sure. Back around 1902, indeed. And he dies only a few years later. So that's something to keep in mind. Psychology being a very young field, he would not have necessarily been speaking to an audience of peers. Okay, you have to imagine that he was probably speaking to a broad audience, probably, I mean, likely an educated audience, but it's not been a room of psychologists. One thing I was reading about James earlier before class said he was trained as a medical doctor, just like Freud. And in Freud, you get this very interesting tension where Freud was a master of writing for totally different in totally different types of styles. He could write beautiful prose. He could write very clinically, and Freud fancied himself a scientist and psychoanalysis a science. And I suspect that James did as well. The reason I point that out is because today psychology is not considered a science, right? It is part of the social sciences. Over at Hopkins, you'll find psychology grouped under the social sciences together with political science, anthropology, sociology, economics. Those guys think they're a science too. They ain't a science, they're a social science and psychology. Now, the scientific aspect of it is psychiatry, which is a subsection of medicine. But medicine, in most other languages, medicine, its situation in the sciences is also, frankly, not terribly secure. It is considered an art, like an art of healing. So, for example, in Dutch, and let me see if, yeah, in Dutch, the word for medicine is geneeskunde, and geneeskunde means an art of healing. So I just want you to understand, maybe James likely, similar to Freud, had scientific aspirations for this field. These would not last. These would not bear out. Indeed, in the case of Freud, psychoanalysis is largely discredited in the field itself. The humanities and at art schools love that shit, but The scientists themselves, scientific community does not. William James, I think he clearly, at least in this book, exposes himself to less criticism. I think largely because he's doing something a lot more limited. You know, we got to ask ourselves this question, like, what is he really up to here? Let's talk for a second about the title. What's up with the title? What does the title suggest? I'm really bad with titles. James is worse. This is the worst title ever, The Variety of Religious Experience. When I wrote my first book, my editor said, you need to make the title sexy. And he didn't have an editor tell him this, because this is a shit title. So what's up with that? What does that title suggest to you all? The Varieties of Religious Experience.
It kind of feels more like a survey than like the title suggests more like a survey than like an actual like philosophical analysis of religious experience.
Thank you. Survey. M.
Hey, well, I mean, after reading it, I kind of understood the title because he's talking about like a lot of religious experiences that don't necessarily fall into what we would normally perceive as religion. So like, you know, the mind cure and New England transcendentalism and things that have like spiritual or religious aspects to it, but they're not like God focused. So he's kind of like including those in that variety is what I got out of it.
Very good. Yeah. And this is not God focused. Now, I started you off in a really weird, I see those other hands. I'm just going to say one tangent before I call on you guys. You know, I typically a class like this, philosophy of religion, would start you off on a totally different note. And we would start talking about, for example, proofs of the existence of God, whether the existence of God can be rationally deduced or proven. What William James here is a totally different approach. Some might say refreshingly different approach. Instead of being God focused, as M points out, he is looking at the experience of the believer. That's a weird way to go about religion, right? To understand what religion is, let's go through these believers and their experiences and see what we can make of it. Finn.
Hello. Yes, I was going to say the title, when I first heard it, it made me lie down and go honk, me, 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 like, you know. But like, I think that whenever I read stuff about like religion, philosophy, I usually just kind of pull the parts that make the most sense to me or things that I really resonate with, which is kind of, I guess, the idea. But when he's talking about the variety of religious experience, I sort of saw that, interpreted that through what he was saying, like about how things that simplify religion, even though this book is trying to simplify it into understandable concepts, things that simplify religion aren't like sound ideas, if that makes sense, because it's just like there's variety, baby. There's shades of it, I guess, and that was sort of what I put together from it. Besides being asleep.
Good, awesome. Okay, hey Gia, you had your hand up. Do you not want to say anything now?
Oh yeah, I can say something. So what with the title and kind of just after the reading, I noticed that there's a lot of like recollections from other people and like there are other narratives. So I kind of attribute that back to the title as like it is the experience of other people. And like not necessarily so much maybe religion, but just like these holistic like spiritual like experiences and how they could be religious.
Gotcha. Awesome. Tobias, you don't have a hand raise section? That's hard.
No, I don't. I don't have the hand raise. So I've just been doing my best with the closest thing that I could find.
Sorry. I don't like to give props to technology, but I will say when you raise your hand, it shows up in which order you've raised them. So it makes it really easy for me to go down the list. So if you're able, do it. If you're not, do what Tobias does. So Tobias, you have the floor.
Well, firstly, I'm actually going to go back to the hand raising thing for a second. It used to be in the chat. There used to be a little drop down arrow, and it was great, and it was lovely, and I don't know where it is now. But reactions. Well, I I don't have it yet, and that's
If you
wacky
try
and wild
going
to me.
into participants, like, and then it brings up that box at the bottom. It should have the raise hand button.
Found it. I found it. Thank you.
Cool. All right, well, anyway, you have the floor. Go for it.
All right. So in terms of like talking about the varieties of hold on, I have to relook at what the actual title is. Like varieties of religious experience. I'm kind of gonna go over what people already said, but I mean, yeah, William James does very much touch on like not just like the deist or like the Christian sort of religion. I know that he does talk about it a lot because I think that's just like what he's around mostly. But he does also kind of point out like there are other things, there are other ways and beliefs and rule sets that a lot of religious people have, and even in actual like even in the same religion, not every person experiences their religion the same way. Some people will be like really into it, and other people will be like, God exists, probably. And I know that he doesn't really touch on agnosticism, but I think that this book could also be looked at from a more agnostic point, where it's like God may or may not exist. Let's see what the people who believe in him have to say.
Very good.
Also, I don't know how to get rid of the raised hand. I'm sorry.
I think it's another option under that box at the bottom of participants. But don't worry about it. Zach.
Yeah. So the title of what we were reading with, I feel like the word that kind of stands out to me is like the experience part, because I feel like the reading kind of emphasized like we've been talking about, like the personal experience with religion, and the ways in which like the sensations or whatever that or experience that comes with it like influences that personal experience. And to me, that kind of reminded me of like the whole idea of like Gnosticism and like Christianity, and then like Jewish Gnosticism as well, that like there's a certain personal, more spiritual experience that's tied to religion that's like individual and different for every person that experiences it. That's one thing that I think that like listing all of these experiences with all of these patients kind of brought to mind for me.
Okay. Boyd Irish points out that there's a subtitle that I never even noticed. It's the edition I've ordered for your book. It's really nowhere to be found unless you go to page like 7. It's hidden. A Study of Human Nature. That fits nicely with what you guys are saying here, right? That he's examining this as a feature of human nature. I think Arthur wanted to say something. Arthur, you still out there?
Oh yeah, I just had a thought on agnosticism because Tobias brought it up, but I figured we're probably going into that later. So
well, we got a lot to tackle here, so why don't we dive in? I'm just going to check and make sure. Tobias, yeah.
So before we go into agnosticism, talking about that tasty little subtitle. We talked about this way back in high school in my world history course, actually, where my teacher said that a lot of people tend to think of religion and science as two opposites when it's not true. It's trying to figure out the truth, but from two different perspectives. And I think William James is kind of like coming at it from both of those perspectives at the same time, and I think that's pretty neat.
Good. Finn.
Oh, I just wanted to say something about, just because we're all doing like this, we're starting to get into like the discussions element of it all. I was just gonna say, when people say things like Christianity, Judaism, or Judeo-Christian, that kind of thing, I don't think that that's really a proper way of approaching Abrahamic religion, because everyone's very quick to leave out Islam and alienate it from its Abrahamic roots. And just because they don't know enough about it or they're scared to bring it up or mention it. But usually when people say Judeo-Christian, they don't mean Judeo. they're kind of gussying up Christian, you know? So I guess if you're talking about like Abrahamic religion and you mean Christianity, say Christianity, because all of it is so different. There's so much relationship with it, all that fun stuff. But I'm not coming for Zach's gig. I promise.
I'm just saying, I think I have to respectfully disagree because the Old Testament is like part of that, you know?
Yeah, it's just the culture has evolved so much from that. And then there's this huge deviation from it that people don't respect, that Judaism and Islam share like their own independent thing. And I know you, Baruch Hashem, I know you're out here being not Jew with me, but I'm just saying, it's just so fascinating to me when people always group Judaism and Christianity, and then they're like, but I don't know anything about Islam. I'm like, what? Like, come on. If you think that you know enough about Judaism based on what you know about Christianity, you know something about Islam. Okay, like, girl.
All right,
Anyway.
so you had your hand up.
Oh, wait, what, me?
Well, your hand is up.
Oh, yes, it is. It was something that Tobias said that I'm trying to remember now. I'm blanking.
I'm just going to say one thing in response to Finn. That's a great point. Abrahamic absolutely captures a lot. We're not going to be dealing with Islam much until we get to, well, Dawkins and Dennett for sure. But one thing that does occur to me is, it's funny, you know, it made me reflect on James, and he does not really care. I mean, yes, he's mostly dealing with Christians, obviously, but he does not care to distinguish between the different sects, because I think, as someone made this point earlier, the kind of experiences he's interested in are really very granular. He's talking about personal religious experience, not saying like, this is how Catholics be and this is how Lutherans are or Quakers. It's just individuals. In fact, I find it hard to think of any places he gives away even what the denomination is, you know. But we got to dive in here in earnest. I think I asked you about this in the discussion, in the reading questions, but he opens here with a very specific and telltale definition of religion. He says, I think I shortened it, it is belief in things unseen, or as he puts it more expansively, belief in an unseen order, and then the attempt to harmonize yourself with that order, something like that. What does this leave out? Arthur.
Well, I thought that was interesting just because, like, we know, this might be incorrect, so anyone feel free to correct me, but I'm pretty sure like Native Americans, they worshiped like parts of nature and like things like that. So, you know, obviously we can see and experience those and touch those. But I thought it was interesting because he talks about this concept of what he called like a mental object, and how it's like, so like if someone did, for example, say a culture worshipped like a river that they live by or something, is that like projection of like that importance and like specialness, that mental object? Because then wouldn't that apply to like literally everything in our life, even like non-religiously? So I guess I just thought that was interesting.
Thank you. Let's see, Rebecca.
Yeah, so I kind of like listening to the discussion about this. I'm thinking that this is kind of where I think he tells on himself a little bit in where he views maybe most of what religion is. Because like Christianity, I think, is one of the religions that does focus a lot on belief in unseen. And I think I mentioned this in my reading response, how like a lot of biblical recollections about God is like, it's not even that you can't see him because he's on another plane of existence or because it's difficult to, but like you would literally die if you did. like they're kind of pushing the idea that it is not physically possible for you to see this thing, but you're still expected to believe it. Whereas was it Arthur just mentioned? Like there are other religions that do focus on physical, literal objects that exist in nature or exist in the world that people definitely worship. So I don't think it's simple enough to reduce religion to just belief in things unseen. And I think that like definition maybe would apply more to faith in a religion. Like having faith in something to me feels more like believing in something against evidence suggesting that you shouldn't, if that makes sense. But yeah, it seems like he is mostly referring to religions where there's like these higher powers instead of religions that are based around like things that are actually there.
Good. In response to Zach, you're up, but in response to Arthur's comment in the chat, St. Thomas Aquinas describes paradise as the beatific vision, the blessed vision, beholding God for eternity. That's all you need. That's what he says. Let's see here, Zach.
Yeah, so I think one thing that could be like pretty important to note with this is that kind of ties back to what Arthur was saying, is like Plato's philosophies of like the the mental object, and like how there's like a mental world in which everything exists as an object in your mind in the same way that it exists in the real physical world. And I think that like what James is saying here about religion being belief in the unseen really kind of ties back to that Platonic philosophy, and like you could see the influences of Greek philosophy on his perspective on religion here.
Cool. 2 comments. I'm gonna hand it off to Finn here. Yes, in general, I think he has in mind that the point that religions involve the affirmation of metaphysical beings, be they deities or spirits. That's something he attributes across the spectrum. Arthur mentions like the Native American religions worshiping elements in nature. You will hear Native Americans authors talk about spirits though. So, there's still some spiritual element there. And I also just want to rephrase the question so you understand exactly what I'm asking here. When you think of religion, what is he neglecting? That kind of thing. Think about the religions of the world. What is he leaving out? Finn.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Well, basically, I think everyone's having similar reservations on like the idea of a belief in things unseen, because it's like, yeah, let's take it apart. So many religions have tangible things, have things that are right in front of them, or just like there's just so many things you can think about that have physical representation. I said that, like, I remember in my response, I love how I didn't highlight it in the book, but whatever. He kind of brings it back together for me when he I think he just mentioned something or implied it being a what did I say? It was like a sensation of things unseen. So it was talking more about like
yes,
what the item like, or what the like. So for example, in a lot of indigenous faiths in America, there's a lot of things about nature, and like you said, from they bring in spirits to it, and how there's life within it, and it's whatever. But my point is that like it's seeing the spirit and feeling the spirit. That's kind of what I interpreted as the unseen element. Even though I like I said, I'm not particularly a fan of the way he phrased it. I also mentioned this when religious scholars define religion in their funky little sentence. Usually that implies more about their writing than it will about faith and religion in general. So it's going to tell us more about how he views religion, so we can understand what kind of concepts he's going to touch on. Less of like religion is belief in things unseen. At least that's what I put together.
Yeah. Two things. This is if I neglect to say at the beginning, this is a really weird definition of religion. Religion is belief in things unseen. I remember the first time I read it, I just had to do a double take. Like, what a strange way of defining religion. I guess it is in a way. Yeah. The other thing is, Finn, you point exactly, there's something paradoxical here that he wants to point out. It is a sensation of something unseen. It is a perception of something unperceived. You know it's there, right? Sunny.
Oh yeah, Arthur pointed out the first few tiblets of what I was gonna say there. The thing is that it might be a little bit of a mushy or too general of a definition because there are a lot of things that we believe in that we do not see and we take for granted. It might be a different kind of knowledge or belief from what we believe is the kind of perception of religion. We believe in science, but we haven't actually gone through the experiments ourselves. We just read the textbooks and just believe what people tell us. Yeah, I wish somebody would, if there's somebody who thinks that is a different belief or a different knowledge, I wish they would like tell me like how they are different.
Very good. Well, Zach, you raised your hand.
Yeah, so I think about that, like that also ties back to what James says about like rationalism, and that really science and religion come from the same place of rationalist thought, which he defined in 3 terms, or 4 rather. He says that rationalism is defined by having definitely statable abstract principles, definite facts of sensation, definite hypothesis based on those facts, and then definite inferences logically drawn. So I think that religion, it has definitely statable abstract principles. It has religious experiences also have facts of sensation, have hypothesis based on those facts, and then inferences logically drawn. And then it's really the same thing with science. So I think that we could just kind of see that they're coming from the same place of humans wanting to explain what's happening in the world, really.
Good. Finn, did you want to say something else?
No, I just left my hand up. I'm an idiot.
Okay. Y'all are focusing on the epistemic claim here, which is that it's religion is belief in things unseen. I probably should have asked you this question last week before you'd seen this, right? How would you define religion? What would you expect to see in a definition of religion? He's leaving a lot out. I don't want to be comprehensive. It's just that there's his definition kind of gives away his focus and maybe his prejudices, but there is something definitely missing here. Brian?
I think it's more than just belief, but like, what do you do about it? It's something where you can believe in something and just have that belief, but are you going to do anything with it? And that doesn't necessarily mean that having religion means you have to go and pray or do anything like that. But just having that belief, I think you will kind of instinctually just want to, at least if you're like wholehearted, to make yourself better, to make yourself happy in some way, whether it's just tweaking the way you think or actually going to church or confessing or anything like that. It's not just like what you believe, but what you do, you know, how you take that belief. And if you have the need or the will to pursue that in any sort of way that's not completely passive.
Awesome. Yeah, Sunny, I see your hand, but Rebecca points out, in Christianity, it's not enough to believe. This is the famous the fight between Luther and the Catholics, where Luther says you'll be saved by faith alone, and the Catholics say it's acts in addition to faith. Sunny.
Oh yeah, to build off of Brian's point and Rebecca's point, yeah. He does leave out action and actual practice and ritual. I'm guessing that he's just assuming that belief enough and like actual belief, not just a whimsy, would be enough to pull somebody into action, which is why I guess the Lutherans who believe that you can get saved by faith necessarily believe that if you do have faith, then that faith will produce works, actions that result from your faith.
Awesome. Thank you. Arthur.
I think it's interesting, like Sunny, you mentioned like practicing, but I think it's interesting because I've definitely met people who consider themselves religious or believe in like a higher power or whatever, who like don't really do like anything about it, who just kind of live their life just believing in it. So I guess I don't necessarily think to be religious you need to like actively worship, I guess.
You could if I heard you rightly, you could also flip it and say more like, how many believers really believe?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, how many people that really go through the rituals, do they honestly wrestle with their beliefs at night? I can tell you, for example, my grandmother was a very pious woman. She didn't sit down with William James every night and wrestle with, no, she didn't have fucking time. She had 10 kids, but, let's see here. Brian, you have your hand up again.
I was just going to kind of debate a little bit about having that belief and not doing anything with it. Is it something where like, if you have that belief, would you not want to, is there some sort of like subconscious reaction where you do want to instinctually be a better person? Kind of like when they compared it to like the Morbid Mind and how they may think that's just like, well, I can't do anything about it. It doesn't have to be something where you're going so full-hearted and it's something where people can see it. But I feel like just having the belief there's going to be a little bit in you that you're just going to want to, whether you like it or not, try to achieve happiness.
It's funny. He does not, well, happiness, yes. He does point out that happiness is a major concern, but it's so funny. He does not talk about morality as being part of this religious experience. It's really not there. And that's very curious to me. I think that's very indicative. Finn.
Yeah, I was going to talk about the Morbid Mind thing. I kind of interpreted that to like what was talked about, like with if you're the practicer or I think that all religious experiences are obviously experienced through the self. That's why there are people who are various shades of religious and non-religious.
Right.
So having that mental health spiritually is really important in it. So when I remember James was talking about people that were obsessed with like even the prospect of doing evil, right? And there's like that like speech of like atonement and forgiveness and all this fun stuff, but it's like you can't force remorse and you also can't live in waiting for sin. So it's like it works like with like you just can't so I read that as more of like you need that mental awareness, otherwise you're going to taint the experience and it becomes toxic. And that's what a lot of people with a lot of power have done to trample others, is use that toxicity and that fear of that the average man has of their immortal soul and all that fun stuff. But yeah, I think just understanding that it comes from you is really important with that health idea.
Yeah, I'm going to riff on that for a second. This occurred to me as I was reading over James today is, how individualistic is faith? How individual is every person's experience of faith? Freud has one saying, he doesn't mean it religious because he doesn't like religion, but he uses religious language all the time. Freud says at one point, everybody will be saved in their own way. And, everybody has their own conversion stories. I think that is something that James is definitely suggesting. But I have a very straightforward question. But before I do it, I'm going to see what Chris has to say and Natan.
Okay, so I guess it was like going further into this conversation about his statement on this like morbid mind, and it's like when I was thinking back to what you're saying about like, do the believers believe? And it's like, well, I guess like, when you have these people who are like so like captivated with this idea of like evil and just like this continuous suffering of like there's evil around, like we're all capable of evil. And it's like, I mean, do they really believe in a God? And like, but or are they more like afraid of a God and that's why they act, And that's sort of like, I don't know, I thought it was like just a really interesting part of the text. And yeah.
Gotcha. Thank you. Natan.
Going back to like your comment about individualism and how people view religion, someone told me this very interesting quote, and ever since he said it, it's like just stuck with me. And the quote goes, "My perspective, my reality." I was like, yeah.
Say it again.
My perspective, so my reality. So I was like, yeah. So from your perspective, anything could be like whatever it is. So I just want to throw that out there.
Well, good. Yeah. No, I mean, and that's definitely the way he's approaching this is, now I don't want to undermine the universal aspects here because there are obviously universal aspects here that we are not going to, that the religious people will not, dismiss, right? This is ultimately what is going to distinguish what they're experiencing from anything pathological. Okay. But more on that in a second. Arthur.
I definitely feel like religion serves like to the self, I guess, because I feel like it's for a lot of people, it kind of gives them like meaning for like what they're like, how they live and what they're doing in their life, essentially. So it's like much more comforting to believe that like their life like means something in the eyes of like a higher being than like than to be essentially alone in the universe,
Absolutely. It's much more fun. Chris.
Because I feel like you're gonna get into this, but like I feel like this is an excerpt that might be like preceding what you might say right now. But yeah, so this is like, yeah. And so James wrote, the unreason and immediate assurance is a deep thing in us, and the reason argument is but a surface exhibition. Instinct leads, intelligence does but follow if a person feels the presence of a living God after the fashion shown by my quotations or critical arguments, be they never so superior, will vainly set themselves to change his faith, which I thought was like, a really good point to make, where it's like, like if someone has this, like possibly hallucination experience, but they're so set in their faith, like you're not gonna be able to change them from the idea that what they had was a religious experience.
Thank you. Okay, now for my very straightforward question, which is a long time coming. And this is not something to be belabored. It's a pretty simple question, I think, pretty simple answer. Why do people go to church, synagogue, temple, mosque? Rebecca, what are they looking for?
I think I was actually like kind of typing a chat about this right as you asked that. But to me, it seems like humans in general like to have routine and ritual and also community. So every time I think about people going to one of those places of worship, it seems like they're searching for other people who are thinking like them, believing in what they believe in. Some come searching for answers, or like what Tobias just said, for validation. And a lot of the times it can be a really cathartic and nice experience for them to find other people who are thinking in the same vein. And then I think sometimes like people go searching for that and they find like a lot of opposite things, like what we were just discussing about like toxic theology. And a lot of people end up being like shamed out of those spaces, which is really sad. Yeah, I mean, I think those things I just mentioned are like the core reasons why people go. But then why they stay or why they leave could be like totally different.
Good, thank you. M.
Yeah, my answer was kind of similar for the primarily community, but I also wanted to add in that the tradition of going to church and other religious traditions that people may follow in their practice generally make you less afraid of death. in a way where they help you stay connected to your community members, especially those that have already passed on. So doing something that maybe your ancestors did, or people who belong to your community that you never met before, it makes you feel connected to them, and it makes you kind of less afraid to have to go through something alone.
Good. As Edmund Burke pointed out, early British philosopher, it's affirming. He was talking about tradition more broadly, not specific religion, but it's affirming a community not only of the living but of the dead and those to come. Right, Zach.
Yeah, so the idea of like religion and community and tradition kind of going hand in hand. I think maybe the thing that separates specifically religion from maybe like a larger idea of like a personal spirituality is tradition, which and therefore community, because those two things rely on each other. So I think that maybe like the more specific traditional practices related to religion is what separates the personal experience of spirituality from the tradition of religion.
Thank you. Natan.
Yeah, I was gonna agree with everyone, like, yeah, community rituals, but also just, again, my family, I was taught you go to synagogue to say thanks and to pray. Like that's how we do it. That's how we acknowledge like our religion, Judaism, and like community. Like my mom always tells me, if you don't go to synagogue, you won't find a wife. I'm like, oh. But yeah, so like community, find people like-minded. I had something else to say, but I just forgot. I just,
yeah, I mean, Judaism is an excellent example of this, right? It is I have a lot of Jewish friends. Do they really believe? Not necessarily, but they call themselves Jewish. And it is communing with a culture and a tradition. It's affirming your tradition. So the point is, to put it to James, is, James, does religion involve an epistemic proposition? He thinks so. But for many people, there is no epistemic proposition, right? These are the conditions for being Jewish. You must believe blah, blah. A lot of Jews, they simply don't go with that. By the way, a lot of Catholics are like that too. There's a lot of believers like that. I'm putting in the chat here the name of my favorite philosopher, who is James's critic, George Santayana, was actually his student. Santayana was one of these curious people. He was an atheist Catholic. There are plenty of them, believe me. And he said, listen, James, a lot of believers, they don't really believe. They don't really believe the mumbo jumbo, but they certainly haven't sat down to work out iron out the details, the finer metaphysical details. The system works for them. The moral code, the religion, the community, everything makes sense. When you uproot religion from its maybe traditional cultural environment, and, he's writing as an American where people are released from these largely, then yes, then religion becomes a matter of personal affirmation, right? But in traditional settings, you are born into a faith, you go through traditions. Why do you celebrate Passover, Easter, Ramadan? That's because that's what you do, right? Gia.
Well, I was going to go back to the point that Rebecca made, where like a lot of times people will go to like church when they're trying to cope with something, like whether it's an illness or death, or they're trying to get over an addiction or something. Like I feel like believing in a way can help people cope, where they put all of their faith and all of their accountability on a God. Where it's like, it's no longer in my hands. Like if I have this disease or something, God will be able to cure me, or he knows the right path or the right way. So I see it more as like a way to like cope with things, and like people go in the sense that they feel like, they'll get something in return for going.
Okay. Thank you very much. Zach?
Oh, sorry. I had my hand raised from earlier.
No worries. Iris.
For me, because like growing up in Philippines, like Catholicism is like a culture and a tradition. There's like I was Christian. I mean, like baptized as Catholic. I went to Catholic school and everything. And then when I moved here, like something changed. Like I was cut off from that constant like going to mass every Sunday to a point where like now I don't go to church, but my mom goes. And I think for her, like when she came here, like it became comfort to her, like having that there is that community that she can rely, like a higher power that she can rely, because she was like alone when she moved here first. So I think it's kind of like interesting how like it changed in like the generation, because she's still practicing and I'm right out here. Like I still believe, but I just don't go to church anymore.
Gotcha.
I do pray. Yeah.
It's funny, James Joyce, he has a quote, I think in Ulysses, where he says his two characters are walking along the street and one of them says, they were all Irish. Well, except for Leopold Bloom was Jewish, but most of the characters are Irish Catholic. And if you're Irish, my mother's Irish, if you're Irish, being Catholic is a big part of your identity. So the conversation that Joyce's characters are having in Ulysses is one guy, they're debating God, and one guy says to him, well, why don't you become a Protestant? And he looks at the guy and says, are you crazy? I might be an atheist, but I'm not insane, right? So in other words, being Catholic is part of his identity, and there's no way he could possibly contemplate even the other side, even if that makes sense to him epistemologically. Right? That's unthinkable for him because being Catholic is so part of his identity. Sunny.
Oh, yeah. I would like to point out that strangely enough, it was when religions were persecuted that they experienced the most revivals, it seems. Like even during the Great Revival of like the 1800s, and even when the Christians were persecuted during the Roman period, and when the Jews during the Holocaust, and even Native Americans when they were being persecuted in the States and having another religion enforced upon them. I think it was during those times that when their rituals and their practices were banned, that was when the religion itself received an upsurge of more believers and more devout believers as that, which is kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah, people rally around those aspects of their culture / faith. Culture and faith bleed into one another very easily all the time. And again, the salient contrast here is to realize that he's not talking about culture at all, James. He's talking about an epistemic, like a belief proposition. Okay, just keep that in mind. We have a couple hands up next. I'm just going to say this. You all are so talkative. I'm going to go to 3. Okay. If you have a problem with that, whatever, but just doing it. Okay. Chris.
Oh, yeah. I thought it was interesting that you brought up George Santayana, because especially like him as a critic to William James, because like he does come from a culture, like he's a Spaniard, where like a lot of Spanish traditions are based in Catholicism, so he really can't separate his Spanish culture from his religion. And I think that's also like going back to what Irish said and what Rebecca said in the chat, where it's like, like for those of us who are like born into it, like there really is like no other option, Right. And so then especially as diaspora, like people from diaspora, like when you come somewhere else, one of the main things to find like people from your culture is like through this shared religion. So like, my family came here and a lot of the people that they met were through mass that was done in Spanish.
Gotcha. Finn.
So yeah, we were just talking about a lot, so I thought I had my hand raised like a while ago, but it was after, I believe, what Nathan said. But yeah, no, the marriage between religion and grief is like so unparalleled. Like I remember and then that also involves that unity, because the best way to move on from grief is through unity and finding togetherness with people. And that just, when someone doesn't have that, where are they going to go? And basically, I remember really vividly. My father, he was always kind of religious, but after his father died, and then my mom and him shortly divorced, or shortly after divorced, he immediately just dived right in. We went to a Reform synagogue temple in Dallas, and then he said, none of that anymore. I'm going to a Chabad, which is more conservative, more about teaching and all that fun stuff. And he just completely flipped it. And I was like, whoa, you know, so it's very interesting that that relationship exists like everywhere. And that what a lot of people also have been pointing out, the relationship between ethnicity or nationality and religion. There are some like specific ethno-religions where specifically like being a part of that religion is the ethnicity. But like, for example, just what you were saying about Irish people and Catholicism, I just assume someone's like top of the morning, I'm like, okay, Catholic king, like we out here. But yeah, no, I think that there is that you can discover all of these universal topics through what you're connected in, you know, if that makes sense. Like, yeah, so anyway, just sharing.
Arthur.
Yeah, this like idea of community and religion, I just think it's interesting because in my ancient through Gothic class, we're talking about like cave paintings, and you know, it's impossible to like actually know what they were used for, but like almost everyone is like it was probably partially religious at least, like or like ritualistic.
Right.
And I don't know, I just think that's wonderful. Like even before we had all these like complicated concepts of philosophy and you know, science and all that, like people still like it's just human nature to try to like explain things or like make certain things special. Whether that's like a, you know, a ceremony for like coming of age or like a hunting or whatever it is. So I don't know, I just think that's interesting. That, you know, even just I just think it's part of humans, I guess.
Very good. Zach.
Yeah, so I think I kind of wanted to say something similar to what Finn was saying, really, just but that like the community aspect and like connection to community that comes with religion. I'm wondering if it's kind of a predecessor to the like more spiritual aspect, so that like the connection to the community is what opens up the connection to the spiritual or metaphysical. Or I'm just kind of wondering like what comes first in this situation as like a chicken and the egg thing, like if it's necessarily like that the spirituality comes first or that like the community comes first, or maybe it's equally as important. Like maybe there's that like religion, it has like is inherently has a duality between community and spirituality, and that you can't really separate the two.
Good. Well, I'm making the proposition that for many believers, the spiritual aspect is non-existent, or not believers, the wrong word, practitioners. You know, that's, I think, the point of Santayana's contention, right? Chris, did you want to say something else?
Oh, yeah. What Arthur said reminded me of this, but I think it's also like part of the, like one of the purposes of practicing religion is that like it removes responsibility and like autonomy from the person practicing it in terms of like, you know, because it's like, oh, a higher power did this, or it's like, you know, I'm not the bad one, the other person is bad, they're the sinner, they tempted me. So like, you know, these sort of things that can like justify, you know, these sort of like actions that they might take. And that might be a reason to follow religion, because you don't have to take full responsibility for what you do to yourself and to the environment and people around you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. There's a lot of useful stuff here that's going to help us, I think, with the question I'm about to ask next. We have to dive into the nitty gritty here. What's interesting, of course, now, you know, the way he puts it, he talks about belief in things unseen. He is a psychologist, right? So the big question for him is going to be, what does all this mean from a psychological standpoint? And through the chapters I had you read for today, he talks about basically two different types of psychological phenomena in order to understand better the religious experience. And we also need to understand the difference between the psychological phenomena. So 2 points he makes in lecture 3, I want to make sure that we're clear on. Humans are unique animals in that they can be impacted and affected and influenced by invisible objects at all, right? This is a unique feature of human nature itself, hence the subtitle, right? I don't look out my window and see a group of squirrels in a circle engaged in worship of a deity. And if they do it secretly. But humans are moved by these kinds of things, and we are filled with conviction by them, and we do crazy things too as a result, right? He also makes the point that invisible objects can have an exceptional and profound influence on us, sometimes even more impactful than seen objects, okay? Just be sure you have those in mind. Now, of course, as some of you have indicated, the major psychological experience or phenomenon to which he compares religious experience in lecture 3 is hallucination. Two questions. Why? And more importantly, what's the difference? So let me start with the first one. Why does he bring up the example of hallucinations?
Well, oh, sorry.
Arthur beat you to it.
Oh no, if you have something to say, you can. It's all good.
Oh, okay. I mean, I was just gonna say that like hallucination, in the way that he's defining religion as belief in something unseen, hallucinations are something that is unseen by most people, except for, you know, the person experiencing it. But it doesn't really adhere to the whole idea of like rationalist thought that there's like a causation that's related to something that you know. So I think that that's where the main difference is, but that's all I want to say.
Nice point, Zach. If he had offered me up the definition early on, belief in things unseen, I would have said, oh, you mean a hallucination, right? His definition, belief in things unseen, that suits hallucination better than any. Arthur, you want to go ahead now?
Yeah. I just think it's interesting because as he starts to talk about this, he kind of starts giving a more like scientific, psychological explanation about how like it's like a distilled reality that our brains like just like believe in because it is such a distilled thing that it becomes like almost physical to us. But I thought that was interesting because he basically was like, not hallucinations are scientific, but sometimes they're not. So it felt like he was sort of dancing around giving like a direct answer on whether hallucinations were am I still connected? My thing like froze.
I hear you, Arthur.
Okay. Excuse me. Yeah, it just kind of, to me, it felt like he was kind of skirting around saying hallucinations were or weren't inherently religious or not.
He's distinguishing them. He's describing. I mean, he compares them, but he doesn't. You know, even though like what's weird is that, but in terms of one definition, they are exactly the same thing. So there's definitely they compare, but he's not going to say that a religious experience is a hallucination, although stunningly similar. Just about what you said a second ago about the scientific justification for hallucinations, there would not have been in his time, right? They would have had no.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Nothing at all now. Thank you, Finn.
Yeah, I was gonna say about hallucinations. I don't know my brain. I guess that I might have made this up, but I remember him talking about how hallucinations had more of a negative connotation. Or what a lot of people define as hallucination, like it's associated with declining health, delusion, fantasy, not being in touch. You know, like that's what they're associated with. But obviously, if we're talking about signs in religion, like, I mean, I don't know about if like Ezekiel really sat on a little mountaintop and saw a burning God telling him, "What's up, dude?" Like that sounds like a hallucination, obviously. So it's I think the definition that he has where it said that The difference is if it's profound, positive, if you gain something from it, it's often seen more of as a religious experience. But I kind of definitely see like then all hallucination shares that, because what you're getting in touch with is that thing outside of you. And it is that thing. And sometimes people are afraid of what they can conjure or what they can attract. But basically, like, it's like if you want to like I don't know, it's kind of like if someone got a message and they're like, oh, it was just a hallucination, but then they still like are religious. I find that interesting because it's like you're the one getting in touch with the outside realm, bro. Like
Good. Thank you. M.
Yeah, I guess continuing off of that, something I found interesting in the text was that he does actually cite quite a few examples of well-known saints that their religious experiences could be explained away with epilepsy or failing health. But he also kind of is like, I don't care about that, when in the way that he talks about medical materialism and how you can't make any sweeping conclusions about hallucinations because you're not really the one experiencing them. And then he also kind of goes on to talk about the fruits, not roots, which I thought was very interesting. How religious experience.
Explain that point.
Religious experience differs from hallucination in the fact that things are established because of those experiences, like because of religious hallucinations, because of Paul being struck blind and seeing God on his way to Damascus. We now, we have established organized religion, we have Christianity. So why would we discount that based on the sort of infrastructure that that event led to? So realizing that the fruits, so to speak, of these religious experiences are more important than what the initial cause was.
Awesome. Chris.
Yeah, I think Finn also touched base on this, but like one of the big differences between like hallucination and like religious experience was like having that positive, like profound and just like general like feeling from a religious experience. And like in a lot of the anecdotes, they were like, it's like I felt warmed, I felt held, I could feel his presence with me and all that. So it's like, very like affectionate, like, like realization type things. And like I've been through like psychosis induced hallucinations and they are like frightening and disorienting. But I think, like things considered religious experiences can also fall into frightening and disorienting. And I think it's just a matter of like what you walk away with that really makes that difference on what you experienced.
Okay, excellent. So, right, I'm glad you made those points there, Chris. Just calling your attention I'm not going to read over these examples, but in lecture 3, the salient comparison for hallucination and religious experience for him is, of course, this idea of a real, that you sense a real being. By the way, I read over the hallucination accounts again. Those seem like ghosts. I thought right. I would have thought these are ghosts, and any case, but the point, the way he describes it is important, is that you have a sense of feeling that there is a presence here, right? And the same thing when it comes to the religious experience. On page, which one is it? On page 70, he gives a quote of one story. God is more real to me than any thought or thing or person. I feel his presence positively, right? So it's again the feeling of a physical presence. Alex.
I just want to point out, I wrote this in my response, but something that this made me really think about was sleep paralysis, where people feel a presence in the room with them and sometimes can even see like an ominous being existing with them. But it's, I guess, what you could call a hallucination, but it kind of has more of a it gives you like a fearful just like worrying for your life almost feeling. So it's just kind of like the strange comparison between feeling embraced and joyful compared to like, fearing for your life.
Thank you. And I wanted to go back to what Finn was saying a minute ago. This is helpful what you said, Alex. When I asked the question, what is the difference between religious experience and hallucination? Finn said something to the effect of hallucinations have a negative connotation. When I looked over the accounts, what I noticed is it's not exactly the negative connotation Finn mentions. There is the negative connotation Finn mentions is something else. But what you're talking about, Alex, I did notice right away, which is this: that people who experience the physical presence of God, as he describes in these accounts, they're not worried. They're like, cool, God is here. I'm good. This is great. Whereas the guys feeling the experience are like, oh shit. That's why I thought these were ghosts, right? They're like tingling up their spine, like unease, right? There is something wrong going on, right? Good. The negative connotation that Finn gets to is actually more alarming. Hallucinations are not exactly okay. They're not exactly healthy, right? Which raises the issue in psychology terms of pathology. When Freud uses the word pathology, he means disease. That's where the word comes from. Something pathological. So here's really the question he skirts around and asks without asking, which is, if religious experiences are like hallucinations, is religious experience pathological? And I'm just thinking of a text. There's a title of a book popped into my head. Never read the book, but I remember I had a professor in grad school mention it. It's called Is religious experience? There's the question. The book is called The Three Christs of Ypsilanti. And Ypsilanti, if I know, Ypsilanti is a city in Michigan. And the Three Christs of Ypsilanti is about three guys in the psychiatry ward who believed they were Christ. So you had these three Christs. So here's the point, right? If religious experience is like hallucination, Mr. James, Dr. James, how come it is not pathological? There must be some kind of difference between religion and hallucination, no? Now I realize I made a boo-boo. Although I don't feel very bad about this boo-boo, I made a boo-boo in my questions for you for the reading today. I asked you to distinguish your religious experience from hallucination. I looked over this chapter very closely, fine-tooth comb. He never overtly says what the difference is between hallucination and religious experience. So I kind of screwed you, but I don't really feel bad about it because it makes you think hard, work hard, and I'll of course take it with a grain of salt, your answers. And it already sounds like you put a lot of thought into it. You have to read between the lines. There is no doubt in my mind he distinguishes them, because not once in this book will he say or admit in very strong words, although he may have his reservations, he never says outright that religion is pathological. As many of you noticed, he's actually kind of okay with it, which is not the case for Freud. He is not okay with it. James, he's cool with it. It's fine. Well, then the major question is, if religion is like hallucination, how come it's not pathological? So, Zach.
So, an idea that I have about this is that perhaps the difference lies in causation, because if really, like, so we were talking about how like hallucination kind of, it seems like it's causeless, but it's not causeless because the cause is internal. There's like some internal organic biological process that's causing the hallucination to happen. Whereas in religious experience, the idea is that it's external and coming from outside of yourself. So within that, like it's not pathological because it's not coming from.
Thank you.
within you.
James never imagined that his book would be read by art school students who've all taken LSD, right? For us, chemical inducement of hallucination is, we did that this morning, right? But for him, this is, I will beg to differ a little bit, Zach. I don't think does he indicate anywhere? Does he admit external inducement? I don't think he does. I don't think he rules it out, but that doesn't seem to be part of it for him. I know for us, this makes perfect sense. Yes, of course I was tripping, whatever. But for him, this is not at all the case, right? So just be careful. Finn.
I think that there are obviously, what I'm about to say, I think that there are obviously outliers to this, but I also kind of thought of it like, what's it called? Sorry, Arthur's shroom comment just took me by surprise. Fine. Basically, like hallucination. What's it called? What was I gonna say? The separation between what the result of it is, right? So if you do something or you say something, like I think that there's a way to tell if you need to be hospitalized to some extent. I do think that there are outliers, right? But I think that if you're harming yourself or people around you, that's when it's pathological. But if you're not harming yourself and you're like, just like, I'll see shit, like, like live your truth, live your fantasy. I do think that isn't really, I mean, there is definitely like a moral line. Like I think that a lot of people are medicated when they don't need to be, hospitalized when they don't need to be, or vice versa. But I think that when danger becomes an element, that's when I would say it's pathological.
Thank you. Chris.
Yeah, going on with this conversation of pathology, but it's also like, like say somebody's on their deathbed and like, they're like super weak and they're on their way out and like, they're like seeing things and it's like religious experience or not. And I think it's also like considering like when this was written, like, who gets to have their experiences count as being religious or just, being chalked up as crazy and thrown somewhere else. And I think that can like talk a lot about like class and gender and race and how these all like, go into how, because like I'm thinking about it and it's like, if some poor non-white person on the street was talking about God and religious experience, people would think that they're crazy, as opposed to like, like some rich white lady in her house who's like, oh, wow, I just had this weird experience. And it's like, oh, that was probably religious or something. And yeah, so.
Okay, good. So, okay, I get it. Yes, thank you. Sunny?
Oh yeah, building upon Chris's points that on how we differentiate between hallucination, just like general craziness, with genuine religious experiences. It might be me just being lazy with my thinking and kind of giving up, but I'm thinking that if religious experience are truly like interactions with the supernatural, then it might be impossible, at least for us with our current level of knowledge, to actually differentiate between a genuine supernatural experience with just a made up experience. If it's supernatural, how can we judge it and evaluate it with our natural means?
Excellent. Before Arthur takes over here, I just wanted to share something with you. This discussion was prefigured about 50 years before William James by a philosopher by the name of Kierkegaard, who was a Danish philosopher, the first existentialist. He writes a little book called Fear and Trembling, where he basically says, he starts to think about, he's sitting in church one day and the pastor comes up and gives a sermon about Abraham and Isaac. And the story of Abraham and Isaac, for those of you not in the know, or need to be dragged back to Bible school memories, Abraham takes Isaac up to the mount one day to sacrifice him because God told him to do it. And at the last second, God shows up and says, psych, and Isaac is spared and gives him a ram instead. And Kierkegaard listens to this and And the pastor says, and isn't this a wonderful story? And this is a model, Abraham is a model of faith. And Kierkegaard sits in the back there and he thinks to himself, what the fuck? What if I walked out of this church right now and walked down the street and grabbed my son and said, hey, taking him up to that mountain over there to sacrifice him? They would lock me up immediately. He says, why? Why does Abraham get the benefit of the doubt? There is, there's nothing distinguishing. And then, there's nothing that we can judge this guy that he was sane, right? So from one vantage point, it is actually really, really difficult to tell the difference between religious conviction and insanity, and that's why he is drawn into this discussion. Arthur.
Kind of on, a similar note, I mentioned this briefly in my response, but I was thinking about the oracle at Delphi. I think it's Delphi. And, for people who don't know, it was an oracle in like the ancient Greek society. And she had like a temple and people would go and she would give them prophecies like from the gods, essentially.
And she was inhaling volcanic fumes.
Yeah. So they found these fumes later, which they realized, like scientists were like, oh yeah, this could be an explanation for like the vivid, hallucinations and visions people saw when they went there. Mm-hmm. And I just think it's interesting because while obviously there is like an explanation, I also feel like I don't see a reason why like a hallucination couldn't like be still spiritual and like from a higher power, which I guess is the point of what we're talking about. But I feel like they like, I don't know, I guess I feel like to a certain extent, it's like just as valid as like religion itself, I guess.
Oh, hang on. This is where Kierkegaard is helpful. The hallucination becomes a problem when it inspires you to go kill your child.
Yes.
So maybe this is, M was bringing up the point of fruits versus roots. I think this is how M meant it. I hope I understood M correctly. But he doesn't say it in so many words, right? But the way that we are, the way we come off, the way we seem, right? The way the believer seems, right? Now, Abraham is not a great example because he looked fucking crazy dragging his son up the mountain, right? But I think that one of the things that William James is saying throughout here, I think this is assumed by him, is that the religious believer will not do anything rash or illegal. That's what he's presuming. I think so. Finn.
I'm so sorry I keep talking. I might make some ramen noodles for myself, so I shut up for a dang second. But I was gonna say, when you mentioned like Abraham and Isaac, you said that they're kind of like a dramatic example because obviously not everyone's dad wants to kill them. I mean, speak for yourself. But I was just saying that also is completely married with like what you said, like with the status of society. I don't know what Abraham and Isaac were up to. They're probably eating like goats and berries and, like walking around barefooted and stuff. But obviously nowadays, if a man said, I need to go kill my son on a rock because I need some warm water, people are going to be like, I don't know about that. So you're like, I really resonate with that. Like, what is that time of real religious, like direct line speaking versus like, how would we see that right now with laws usually not always designed to protect people? We'd like to think that something would be more dramatic. So it's like, I need to see the receipt that you talked to God about this.
Thank you. So. I was going to say it's a fine line, right? We're having this conversation, and just imagine that I moved the computer screen over and I said, this is excellent. I want you to hear a word from my friend Jesus. Go ahead, right? How would that go down? Like, you'd be like, whoa.
I'd be like, Christ of Nazareth.
Certified nutso, right? There are certain ways this line between insanity and faith are slight, right? This is a slight. definition, division. Zach.
So what we were talking about earlier about religion and community, I think ties into this, because like really it seems like the only thing separating hallucination from religious experience is like the communal acceptance, or like common acceptance of the people that believe in the religion or practice religion. So maybe it's really a lot more arbitrary than internal versus external.
Yeah. Okay. Good. Thank you, Zach. So, you know, as I looked over the text, a couple things occurred to me. And again, you had to read between the lines. And I think that William James actually is being a little sly here. I don't think he's coming out with everything. I don't think he's saying everything or admitting everything. Maybe he's being very political, you know? I mean, you got to think about it this way. He's writing in a time where it was not a common proposition to be an atheist, right? This just was not done. And I do believe that James's religious situation is very much in question. I don't know that it's clear that he's a believer at all. And you'll find out more next week. But, you know, he's being pretty gentle here, right? He doesn't say, he says religious experience is like hallucination. And then he doesn't go on to say, that's why it's fucking crazy. He doesn't say that, right? But he also doesn't say, whoa, I'm sorry you don't like my comparison here. Now here are the ways they're different. He doesn't do that either. He just says, isn't it interesting? They're both belief in things unseen. So what should we surmise? Well, Zach is helpful. He points out that, you know, although he doesn't, again, he does not draw on community. But I would say that is one aspect, right? Lone hallucinations are different from communal hallucinations, maybe, in a way. But, you know, what's interesting between the accounts he gives is, again, when we talk about the account, when he gives those accounts of hallucination, they're all ominous and they're also very uncertain. Okay, I had this sense of something. The accounts of the people who experience God, they say, I knew it was God. And I was thrilled and it was awesome, right? Right. To which we should all say, you sure about that, right? But to the guy experiencing it, maybe that's all that matters to him, right? To James. From the internal experience, there is certainty and there is confidence, right? I definitely noticed that. But beyond that, you know, the other thing is, you know, the hallucinations, they tend to be one-off or individual or unique. What's interesting about the religious experiences is that these tap into widely known or widely known and accepted entities, right? If you understand what I mean, right? They are, and as some of you have noticed, they are also the religious experiences. They tend, when they fall short of hallucination, they are socially acceptable. Okay, but again, he's really pretty timid here, and I think the main point is he wants us to see that there is a close similarity between them, but they're not necessarily pathological. Okay, now I'm going to skip ahead. Like I said, I'm going to go till 3. So the last 15 minutes, I'm going to skip ahead and talk about the section called the Sick Soul, because here he does bring religion closer to pathology. Again, this is where he's talking about melancholy, which we should understand as depression. Now, interesting distinction in the section before that, lecture 4, he talks about healthy-mindedness. And he gives Walt Whitman as an example. Walt Whitman, you know, how is he an example of healthy-mindedness? He just walked around and he like admires the squirrels and the trees, and he was chilling, you know. He lived in South Jersey. He was just chilling, walking around the trees and the grass and loving everything. And he didn't see any bad. You know, he had this disposition. It was an innate disposition to just be happy. Rare for an artist, I might point out. You all probably thought lecture 6 and 7 sounded more familiar. You know, the sick soul. How is the soul? What does he mean by the sick Soul. How is the soul? How is this soul sick? Rebecca.
Yeah, I feel like this could be related to two different things, like both when you're talking about something like clinical depression, where like there's kind of a scientific explanation, like there's literally a chemical imbalance in your brain that
They didn't know, right? Don't forget, they didn't know that at the time.
So melancholy, maybe how they would describe it, like these people who to them seem like inexplicably more inclined to think negatively or to be negative. But you could also think about it in terms of like a religious way. And again, I think I said this in the chat too, but I'm always referencing Christianity because it's kind of the only thing I know of. But like the idea of the fall and that humanity is inherently sinful, is inherently negative, and that focusing on that is just going to remind you of your own like fallibility as a person. And when I read that, like it just, yeah, it kind of made me think like it seems almost illogical for people to be so like happy all the time. And there was a quote that he said that I wrote down, like the lunatic's visions of horror are all drawn from the material of daily fact. How like bad things are happening all the time, and like if you think about that too hard, you will just end up being kind of upset.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's kind of like two veins of thought in that, I think, in that like your soul or your mind at least could literally be sick, but also the religious idea is usually that all humans are sick souls.
Humankind is sick. In Christianity, as you're referencing, it's the idea that human nature is fallen. In Christianity, well, in much of Christianity, not all, in much of Christianity, the notion of the fall is very important symbolically and metaphorical, right? That it is a fallen being. Of course, there are literal elements of Christianity, sects that believe that it really happened. But in any case, more for that later. But yes, thank you. Good. Yeah. Page 137, he talks about Goethe and Luther, right? And he says these are two people who, you know, they were remarkable beings. Goethe, one of the greatest poets of all time, Luther, one of the greatest religious leaders. And those quotes from Luther were just chilling, right? Did you see the quote when he was talking to the Countess and he's like, and she's like, I want you to live with me for 40 more years. And he says, oh, my dear, I would give up my life in paradise if I could die fucking tomorrow, right? It was just, I was like, wow, Luther, what a drag, dude. Relax. You know, he was, in my very non-clinical observation, I'd say he's depressed. Like, I think he's depressed. And Goethe also, and the point was like these people who have, even those who have accomplished amazing things, you know, they just can't see anything good, you know. And that's a very nice quote that Rebecca mentions, although I would take out the word lunatics. And the point is like anybody can survey the damage of life and be like, oh, fuck, right? Meanwhile, Walt Whitman is walking around like South Jersey being like, this is fucking great. I don't know if you've ever been to South Jersey, but whatever. He's like walking around there being like, this is amazing. This is like Eden. I can't believe how lucky I am, right? And I think he says in the chapter on the healthy minded, it's like, how do you, and we probably all know people like this. We probably all have a friend like this. We like get very frustrated with them. Like, would you fucking open your fucking eyes? Any case, you know, he says of the healthy minded, it's like, well, you just have to be, these people are just ignoring certain facts, like the fact that I'm in South Jersey, right? They just ignore these things, right? Not Goethe and Luther. Like Goethe and Luther, you can be like, dude, you actually have a lot going for yourself. Would you look around? You know, no, it's all bad. I want to die tomorrow, right? And he says, this is on page 139, he says, you know, the sick soul is there for, it's not complicated. It's not remote. It's right there. It's just a matter of seeing the facts in a different way. It's about seeing reality in a certain way. 139, he gives a quote. Make the human being's sensitiveness a little greater, carry him a little further over the misery threshold, and the good quality of the successful moments themselves when they occur is spoiled and vitiated, right? All natural goods perish. Riches take wings. Fame is a breath. Love is a cheat. And then he goes on in the next paragraph to quote, this is the book of Ecclesiastes from the Bible. If you ever read the book of Ecclesiastes from the Bible, it is a major downer. It's a very weird little book in the middle of all these stories. And, basically Ecclesiastes says, oh, I'm glad you like the sunrise. Do you know that the earth is going to explode? I know that you love your bed and your children. Do you know they're all going to die? Right? In other words, you can't have anything nice, right? And this is there too, right? That's there too. If only you would see it in that way. What does this have to do with religion? Well, let me turn it over to you guys again. What does this have to do with religion? Why is he interested in all this? Zach?
So this is I'm just kind of spitballing here, but I mean, religion, I kind of, I feel like you could see it, and a lot of like historians see it this way also, that like religion developed as a response to like fear of the unknown, and in this sense it's like fear of death or fear of the finite. So I guess in that way, like religion develops as a response to like this feeling of meaninglessness or nihilism about like the inevitable end of things.
Good. Yeah, and it just occurs to me that, I want to be a little bit careful about tying this too closely to clinical depression, because it's not necessarily. At a lot of points, he's just talking about the absurdity of life, and he has a really funny quote at one point. When he's talking about Ecclesiastes, it occurs to me like, this is existential angst. This is there. You don't have to be particularly depressed to wonder if there's a point to anything, right? Just think for a little while about this tiny little earth hanging in this infinite expanse, and how time is eternal and you will be dead forever. Just think about that for a little bit. Just crawl inside. I don't need to invite you to misery, but it's right there, right? You don't have to be particularly depressed to sink into that. And so the thought occurred to me, how do some people, maybe many people, avoid it, right? I think that's his question in the background, right? How do some or many people avoid that altogether? I don't know. But right. Zach, now I got sidetracked. My question was, what does this have to do with religion? What did you say again?
I was just saying that religion develops as a response to, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Zach. So the point is, I have 5 minutes here. I'm going to tie this together, guys. Again, we're talking about varieties of religious experience. And what's interesting is that you can have different types of religious experience depending on different types of outlooks and different types of personality. So the kind of religion that is related to healthy-mindedness and Walt Whitman is going to be very different from the kind of religion that Luther could find or Tolstoy could find, right? And this is a very different type of religion. So again, he's not interested in, this is a totally different approach to religion in the history of literature and philosophy. Again, he's not talking about different sects and their approach to religion. He's not talking about different denominations. He's talking about different personalities and how they navigate faith, how they manage faith, and but also what kind of faith appeals to them, right? So the interesting point in this chapter here on the sick soul is that, you know, he talks towards the end of it about Tolstoy. And Tolstoy, he points out, you know, would have gone through this kind of, I guess conversion is the word. So one thing that comes up earlier in the reading is this difference between the once-born and the twice-born religions. And I have to admit, this was very confusing at first to me until I finally figured out what he's talking about. Does anybody get it? Otherwise, I'll offer it up first and see. M.
You could correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I interpreted it was that once born religious people are those that sort of gravitate towards the more natural inclination of God, i.e. like just the vibes of God, just like the personal spiritual sense. And then the twice born religious person is someone who is part of a religion that would have a type of conversion, like Christianity, Judaism, Islam, things that are more cultural, traditional, things that are twice born because it's like everyone's part of like the natural world and natural faith, but then you either enter into a different type of religion based on how you're raised, what your family believes, where you grew up, etc.
Yeah, good. Yeah, there is an aspect of personal conversion. Towards the end of that lecture on the sick soul, he specifically singles out Christianity and Buddhism. And I'm not sure why he doesn't single out other religions, but what I will say about those two, especially Buddhism, is that, and we'll see this when we look at Buddhist sermons later in the class, but in Buddhism, there is a very strong emphasis on individual conversion. It's been lost a lot now through the various traditions of Buddhism, but initially the Buddha, you know, it's the Four Noble Truths, right? You have to understand that life is suffering, and that the source of suffering is desire, and that you must root out desire. This is a personal task that you have to undertake yourself. And you get that element in Christianity as well, especially the way that Paul interprets it. St. Paul, that is. So yeah, initially I was confused because I thought by twice born, he meant like you're born into an afterlife. And he does not mean that. He does not. M points out, yeah, like Walt Whitman is an example of once born. He's in peace in nature. James described it as being childlike innocence. The twice born is someone like Luther or Tolstoy, who may have been like Walt Whitman when they were a teenager, but then they rebelled and they started smoking and painting their nails black. And they're like, fuck this shit, we're all gonna die. And then they stay that way for a while until they have a conversion, and they are twice born. Now, very interestingly enough, he suggests strongly. It's funny, he likes Walt Whitman plenty, but he seems to accord greater respect, or at least he's more interested in the twice born, right? Something comes out of Tolstoy's tortuous experience that he thinks is impressive. And, you know, we can think about that more, but he says on 156, 157, he says that Tolstoy came to, you know, he achieved a deeper consciousness. The kind of religiosity that emerges after you have really come to terms with the absurdity of life is a different order of religiosity altogether. And maybe I'll end here. This is on page 156. This is a quote from Tolstoy, about Tolstoy. He says, the bottom 156, this is in the chapter on sick soul, when disillusionment has gone as far as this, there is seldom a restitutio ad integrum. That is the Latin for there's, you know, when your disillusionment has gone this far and you have really dwelled on the absurdity of things, and here he likens it to a kind of insane melancholy. He says the people rarely return to happiness. One has tasted of the fruit of the tree, and the happiness of Eden never comes again. The happiness that comes, when any does come, and often enough it fails to return to acute form, though its form is sometimes very acute, is not the simple ignorance of ill, but something vastly more complex, including natural evil as one of its elements, but finding natural evil no stumbling block and terror because it now sees it swallowed up in natural good. Evil is not justified. Evil is not ignored. It is swallowed up. Now that's vague. I understand. The process is one of redemption, not of mere reversion to natural health, and the sufferer, when saved, is saved by what seems to him a second birth, a deeper kind of conscious being that he could enjoy before. Right. And he goes on to say, like, on page 162, he talks about, this kind of religion, recognizes a call for help. We see the despair of the human condition, and we are turning to some supernatural, like, gamble that there is a divine being, even though surveying the universe, it's hard to detect it. It's almost like the word that comes to mind is like a Hail Mary pass, right? And that is a different order of religiosity altogether. So the point is, just to tie this up, is that, in terms of religious experience, different personalities are drawn to different experiences, different outlooks make for different religious experiences. And there is a wide variety of them, right? There's a wide variety of them. And according to your temperament, you're going to see very different things, right? The temperament, the outlook, the personality of Walt Whitman, very different from Tolstoy, right? And he doesn't suggest or seem to think that there is going to be much uniformity here. But one last point I realize I neglected to hit on, the end of lecture 3, and this is a point that Zach made earlier. Since he's pointing out that religious experience has is so emotionally rooted, right? The fact that it is an experience, right? Think about lecture 3. I felt God's presence with me. Reason has a very little role here. The next time someone says to you, I felt God's presence, and you turn to them and say, oh yeah, did you see him? What he looked like, what he feel like, blah, blah. No, that won't go anywhere. That's not the point he's saying. The point there, it has a totally different seat. It is rooted in instinct, and it's not rooted in reason. Okay. All right. I'm pooped. I'm going to let you all go. Okay. This is good. You guys are good. I'm going to have to be on my A game to manage this whole thing. So I'm going to let you go. Any loose ends for next week, please remind me. I'm happy to cover them, take them up. Next week, your reading assignments on your syllabus and your reading responses due. And I will look at your reading response for today. I'll look at those tonight, and, I'll be on that. Okay. So have a wonderful week. I'll stick around if anybody needs to chat about anything. Okay.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.
Bye,
Thank
everybody.
you. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hi, so I wanted to talk to you.
Go for it.
So, I was like kind of worried about this class because I kind of know nothing about religion.
Fine.
And then it was kind of hard for me to understand the whole text. So I kind of like tried my best to answer everything, and it took me like a few days to understand. And because like my English isn't that good as well. So yeah, but I thought it was pretty fun because it was something that I have never learned before. So I kind of want to stick around, but I was like worried because I wasn't able to participate in the discussion too.
Okay. Don't worry about that.
Yeah.
You can ask questions too. Don't forget.
Okay.
I put something in the chat here, the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. That could be helpful for the William James text to help you understand that better for next week if you want to look. They have nice summaries. So go there and look at William James and look up his writing on religion, and that might help you.
All right. Okay.
And like I said, these are the things. It'll get much more manageable as we move along.
Okay. Yeah, I was like a bit worried, but then I just wanted to stick around.
Okay, do your very best.
Yeah.
If you have any problems as we go forward, let me know. Okay.
All right. I'll send you like emails if I'm stuck with it then.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Later. Bye.
Bye.